you've been
a
a pit watcher and watching the Superfund site for a long time. What got you interested in that initially?
Well, I've been at it for 35 plus years, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I got interested in it basically when Silverboat Creek, became a Superfund site back in 1982, and I happened to be serving in the legislature when that happened, and so I got involved at the time. And at the time, Butte was going through some very serious, stressful economic times, and I just felt that in the position I was in, I needed to become more actively involved, and chose to do so.
Now, they've since, they had these 30 years of secret negotiations, and then finally came up with a memorandum of understanding. Is that correct? Or between the county and the state?
Well, where we are right now really in the process is all of the decisions have been basically made, okay? And it's just a matter of now carrying out those decisions. And obviously, Jim, I have not been pleased with those decisions because I don't really believe that Butte has received the quality cleanup and restoration that it deserves. And so that's why I've remained active in it. I often think about maybe it's time to back off, but every time it seems like you want to back off and maybe choose another direction or maybe get away from it for a while, something happens and kind of brings you back into what's going on. And maybe I'll backtrack a little bit, might give you a little more of what you're looking for. I actually served in the legislature. I got elected in 1979. And then in 1980, the Atlantic Richfield Company closed the smelter in Anaconda. So I happened to be serving in the legislature when that happened, okay? And as things progressed, at the time when that decision was made to close the smelter, the communities really kind of felt that the Anaconda Company, or the Atlantic Richfield Company, not the Anaconda Company, but the Atlantic Richfield Company, who had purchased all of Anaconda's properties, by the way, in 1977, so we're only talking a few years, came to town, and everyone, the feelings in the community was that they were going to come to town and make a decision to retrofit the smelter and make the smelter an environmentally clean smelter, and so Butte and Anaconda wouldn't be dealing with the aftermaths of the smelter as it was. But when they came to town, it was C.R. Anderson was the gentleman from the Atlantic Richfield Company, and when he came to town, he made the announcement that they were closing the smelter. And so it was devastating for our community. It was totally devastating for our community. And when they made that decision, they made it in October of 1980. Instantly what happened is, in Butte and Anaconda, 3,200 people got laid off. Okay, and if you take that to the economic carrier that they use, where a job creates so many alternate jobs out there, I mean, probably on that date, 10,000 people in Butte lost their jobs, Butte and Anaconda. So we went from a community of somewhere around 65,000 people to a community of 30,000 people. And to this day, we're a community of 30,000 people, and we're living with the aftermath of that smelter closing. And what closing the smelter did for both Butte and Anaconda is it destroyed the economies of both communities. That's what it did. It destroyed the economies of both communities, and they haven't revived since that time, And I mean that's really what's kept me interested. And if you go back, like I said, the Atlantic Richfield Company, they bought the Anaconda Company properties in 1977. okay, and they bought them, you know, for a relatively inexpensive price. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million, okay? And most people believe that most of the experts believe that they bought it for a tax write-off. But, you know, as we talk today, I'll make a couple of what I consider the most important points that need to be made. And one of those important points is the fact that the Atlantic Richfield Company, now British Petroleum Company, is 100% responsible for the cleanup in Butte. And they've not been held accountable for that. They've not been held accountable for that. So if you think again, using my numbers and the facts, purchased in 1977, closed the smelter in 1980, they closed the mines. All of the mines were closed actually in 1979, so there was no underground mining taking place since that time. In 1982, they closed the Berkeley pit. In 1982, ironically, on April 22nd, 1982, which is Earth Day, they actually shut off the underground pumps that's caused the flooding of the Berkeley pit and caused the, you know, the underground flooding that's currently taking place in Butte. And then in 1983, they closed what we call the East Continental pit, and it ending mining as we know it in Montana, or as we have known it in Montana, for over 100 years. So, see, the Atlantic Richfield British Petroleum Company, which they are now, they're 100% responsible. For whatever reason, the EPA, the state, and I guess sadly really our local government has not held them accountable for that. And that's kind of the tragedy of the whole thing, I believe. I think, you know, I guess the thing that I would say more than anything else is where we are now in the process, you know, 39 years later. I mean, what we're looking for now is we're looking for a cleanup of the community. And the point that I always try to make with it is that this community deserves the best cleanup possible using the best technologies available, and we are not receiving that. And the reality is, Jim, the future of this community, the environmental future, the economic future, the social future of this community depends on us receiving a responsible cleanup. And to this date, we have not received that responsible cleanup.
I listened to Jim Ford one day, that was I think a couple of years ago, talk about this, the state of things with the parent tailings, and how previous studies had been inaccurate, you know, and some of the wells weren't even on the path of the underground flow and that sort of thing. And you mentioned that the water's way more toxic than they had initially thought.
Yeah, you know, when you talk, if you want to talk about the cleanup of Silverboat Creek, and again, I've been involved in that pretty extensively too, you know. The cleanup, Silverboat Creek really originated on the east ridge of the Continental Divide. So that's where it started, okay? But eventually it was cut off by the Berkeley pit, obviously. But for hundreds of thousands of years, it flowed from the east ridge, you know, down through the community of Mitterville, McQueen on one side, Mitterville on the other, and flowed basically to the Clark Fork River, to the Columbia River. And the ironic thing is, and kind of the key to the whole thing is that the Silverboat Creek is the actual headwaters of the Columbia River, and it's the actual headwaters of the Clark Fork River. And the reason it's the headwaters is because Silverboat Creek is the furthest point east where water flows west to the Continental Divide. So we as a community, it's kind of ironic, as a community, we get our drinking water from east of the Continental Divide, basically from the Big Hole River, and then we deposit our water west of the Continental Divide, you know, through the Clark Fork River. So we're in a unique position. All right, as mining developed and as mining worked, what happened is that Silverboat Creek, which was a pristine, beautifully meandering stream flowing through the middle of our town, so to speak, and flowing onto the Columbia River, it became polluted because what happened with it is that the mines, which we can look out here today out the window and see, the mines, we needed to pump the water out of the mines, the groundwater out of the mines, so that the miners could work in the mines. So we basically pumped the water down in the mines 5,000 feet, okay? And as we pumped the water down, we discharged that water to Silverbow Creek is what happened. That's what happened. And so that's why Silverbow Creek became as polluted as it is, and over the years, say when I was growing up in Butte, and that's why it was as polluted as it was. There are some people in the community, and I don't get it, I don't understand why, but there are some people, leaders actually in the community, who would like others to believe and would like people in our community believe that there was never a Silverbow Creek flowing through Butte, but that's just a fallacy. That's just simply not true. It's kind of the fake news kind of thing that you hear. I mean, it existed for 100,000 years. The Salish Kootenai Indians, for God's sake, fished in Silverbow Creek in Butte for so this beautiful, pristine, clean creek became polluted. That's what happened because of mining. Well, now where we are is we have a situation where there's a method in place to help us, and the method that's in place to help us is Superfund. And one of the things with Superfund is to clean Silverbow Creek. Silverbow Creek is a Superfund site, and it's actually one of the very first Superfund sites. It became a Superfund site actually in 1982, so that's how far back. It's number 20. It's number 20 on the priority list of Superfund sites that was developed, and so there's probably been about 1,500 Superfund sites throughout the United States, and Silverbow Creek was number 20. So we're talking 40 years ago, Silverbow Creek was declared a Superfund site. So now we're trying to clean it. That's what we're trying to do. And what you have happening now is there's disputes on how well do you clean it and what quality should the cleanup receive. My philosophy on it, Jim, and has always been, I'll backtrack a little bit because I think it's important, and I guess one of the very most important things that I would tell you here today from my perspective is that Butte, Montana and Anaconda, Montana have contributed significantly to the growth and development of this great nation. And if it was not for these two communities of Butte and Anaconda, this nation would not be the great nation that it is today. And or from this community was used to electrify the country. It was used to establish a communication system. Most importantly, it was used to build the materials that were necessary to defend this country during times of war. So I always say to people and to groups when I'm giving presentations, if it wasn't for Butte, Montana, and I put Anaconda, Montana in there the same, I mean, you and I might be talking here today in German or Japanese. I mean, that's truly how important Butte, Montana is and was in the shaping and creating of this great nation. And as a result of that, we deserve to be treated better than we're being treated. And we deserve to get the most quality cleanup that you can possibly get. When it comes to Silverbow Creek, like I said, there's some discussion as to the type of contaminants that's there, what we need to do, and how do we need to do it. Let me just follow you down the creek. That might be the easiest thing to do.
Sure.
I'll follow you down the creek, and I'll follow you down the creek from Texas Avenue, or where the concentrator is. I'll follow you all the way to the interstate where it has been cleaned, okay? And so from Texas Avenue to where Silverbow Creek flows under the interstate, Interstate 90 by the Metro sewer plant, I'll follow you that way. You asked a question about the Parrot tailings, and let me just backtrack and just say one other thing. As we talk, I'll think of things too. But the one thing that I always say about me is the greatest asset I bring to the table is my historical background, okay, and my involvements from the beginning. That's the greatest asset that I bring to this table, okay, and so I oftentimes say I know too much, and I wish I didn't know too much sometimes. Okay, it would make things easier for me, and I could back away a lot easier. But because I do know too much, and I do know the history, it's hard to back away. So, and again, there's discrepancy between the agencies, the EPA, the DEQ, and basically Butte Silver, both for that matter, on what needs to be done with cleaning the creek from Texas Avenue to the interstate. And so if you follow it down from Texas Avenue, and if you go from Texas Avenue to Harrison Avenue, that area is basically known as the Parrot tailings area, okay? And the Parrot tailings, again, I'll backtrack a little bit, but you asked me the question earlier about the contamination. When the EPA started the discussions on cleaning Silver Creek, and it really didn't happen in Butte till 2003 or so. All right, they made that decision without doing the due diligence that they needed to do to get the information that they needed to do to make a responsible decision on how to clean it. And in the Parrot tailings area, that's probably the most classic of all, because in the Parrot tailings area, right behind the Butte Civic Center, the groundwater in that area is more contaminated than Berkeley pit water. It's more toxic than Berkeley pit water. When the EPA, the state, and the local government made the decision on how we want to clean it, they made that decision not knowing that. They made the decision not knowing that. Unconscionable that would happen, but it did happen. So they also made the decision not knowing the amount of tailings that were in the Parrot tailings area. They made the decision not knowing how fast the water was flowing in that area. They made the decision not knowing the volume of water flowing in that area. And all of that was discovered after the fact. And it was discovered by the Butte Natural Resource Committee, which is a group of Butte people, some very, very sophisticated people, very knowledgeable people. People like Elizabeth Erickson, people like John McKee, people like Chad Oak Ridge, people like Emmett Reardon, and others. I can go on, others. So they wanted more knowledge before we made a decision to clean it up. So they contracted with the Montana Bureau of Mines to get the research done that I just mentioned. So where we are right now in the process is the Parrot tailings area, the tailings in the Parrot tailings area, which, by the way, we know from research, 80% of the contaminants flow into Silver Creek come from the Parrot tailings area. To this day, the EPA, ARCO BP do not support removing the Parrot tailings, but the state of Montana is removing the Parrot tailings because they know how important it was. But they're removing it using what they call natural resource damage dollars. And the natural resource damage dollars are dollars that are designed to restore an area, like Butte, Montana, for example, to restore Butte, Montana once a proper cleanup's done. They're not designed for cleanup. They're absolutely not designed for cleanup. Zero, that's not what they're for. But the state of Montana, through Governor Bullock, made the decision that we would remove the Parrot tailings, and we would remove the Parrot tailings using natural resource damage dollars. I support removing the Parrot tailings. It's absolutely essential if you're ever going to have a clean Silver Creek, if you're ever going to have a clean Clark Fork River, if you're ever going to have a clean Columbia River, you need to remove all of those tailings. That's absolutely essential, okay? So I support that. But I do not support it using natural resource damage dollars. It's a total responsibility of the Atlantic Richfield British Petroleum Company, 100% responsibility. but because of the EPA and the state and whatever in cahoots with those guys, they have chosen not to do that. But in the process, Jim Ford in the state, who's in charge of that, and guys like Pat Kineen, who has been involved for a long time, and again, those Butte Natural Resource Damage Committee folks, they knew the importance of removing the parent tailings. So in that area, Jim, we're going to remove, the tailings are being removed down as deep as like 96 feet. That's how deep they're going. And they're basically removing all of the tailings that are there, that are exposed. And so that's what's happening. And they're also pumping out the groundwater, and the groundwater is being pumped out, and that's going to happen for at least another couple years, and hopefully in perpetuity. And then you go from Harrison Avenue to where Silverbow Creek flows under Casey Street, which is, by where Albertson used to be and the True Value is. And you go from that stretch, and they're not doing anything. There's nothing, zero, nothing happening there. There's no cleanup there. There's no plan for restoration when it's finished. There's no plan for restoration at the Parrot Tailings area when this is finished. I mean, if they're removing the tailings will be gone. Butte Silver Bowl owns the property, then it's going to be up to Butte Silver Bowl and the taxpayers of Butte Silver Bowl to decide what they want to do with the area. The area from Harrison Avenue to where the creek goes under Casey Street, there's no restoration, there's no cleanup whatsoever. Then when you go to Casey Street, from Casey Street to basically the Chamber of Commerce or Montana Street, the Atlantic Richfield British Petroleum Company is doing that cleanup using the normal Superfund cleanup process. And they're only going to remove 4 feet of tailings, even though they know the tailings are contaminated far deeper than that. But they're only going to remove the top 4 feet, and they're basically only going to remove that because they need it to put in what they call retention ponds that are where the stormwater from the Butte Hill will flow. When there's storms, the stormwater will flow to what they call retention ponds. And so there's 2 huge retention ponds that will go in that area. I call them mosquito ponds or Zika ponds, because that's what they're going to be. They're going to be a big area that eventually will have to be fenced off, because you can't leave this contaminated water for dogs and people and whatever to go in. So eventually, they say they're not going to fence it, but eventually it will have to be fenced off. And then in the area right by the Chamber of Commerce, the Atlantic Richfield Company, British Petroleum Company, has given, if that's the right word, the Department of Environmental Quality a sum of money, which they say is $20 million, to clean that area. So that area is going to be cleaned separately by the State Department of Environmental Quality. And then and by the way, that area has already been cleaned once, but it's contaminated again because we didn't do it right. So they're going to do that. And then from there down, from Montana Street to the interstate, then again, British Petroleum Company, Arco BP, is going to do that cleanup using the normal Superfund cleanup process. So those areas where the British Petroleum Company and the Atlantic Richfield Company and the EPA and basically the state DEQ, because they've approved it, and so has Butte Silver Bowl for that matter. But what they're really doing is a cosmetic cleanup, and they're really doing what they need to do for themselves, so they can create these giant mosquito ponds. That's the only reason they're really doing it. They're not doing it out of the goodness of what should be done. They're just doing it because they need it to put their retention ponds or their mosquito ponds. So that's basically the cleanup that's taken place. So as you can see from and I'm just a regular guy, so keep that in mind. I'm just a regular guy that kind of studies things and knows things, and like I said, my problem is I know too much sometimes, and I wish sometimes I didn't know so much. I really believe that, But the reality is Butte's not getting the cleanup that we need and deserve, and that's what really frustrates me in this whole process. And I just wish we could, and I wish they would do better. And Jim, if you go back, I wrote some stuff this morning. I I was thinking on my walk, because I usually walk in the mornings, or try to walk, or go to tech and work out a little bit. But anyhow, you know, I was thinking, you know, and I did a really extensive interview about, I don't know, probably 6 months back. And it was an interview that was being conducted by a fellow out of Utah. And he was doing this for the Atlantic Richfield British Petroleum Company, and for the state of Montana, and for the EPA. And one of the things that he asked me at the very end of this extensive interview that I did is, he said, would you put together something that was really succinct on what you really believe needs to be done, you know? And as I was on my walk this morning, I was kind of thinking about some of it, and I wrote it down, and I'll just kind of go through it and just paraphrase it real quick for you. But I just wrote down, you know, that I believe, like the cleanup in Butte, you know, and I'm talking about the Berkeley Pit, I'm talking about Cerebral Creek, I'm talking about the Montana Pole Site. I think those are the most important issues facing our community. And I really believe if we don't do those cleanups responsibly, this community is going to remain a community of 30,000 people with an economic future that's very doubtful. Okay, and I just always believed, because of, as I mentioned earlier, because of what Butte contributed to the, you know, to making this nation the great nation that it is. We just deserve better. We deserve to be treated better. And you know, a couple of things that I didn't mention is, you know, like 35%, believe it or not. This is this is an amazing number, and I just saw this recently, but 35% of the copper that was used in World War II came from Butte, Montana. Think about that. 35% of the copper that was used in the war effort came from Butte, Montana. Over 3,500 miners have died, you know, mining the ore, you know, and you know, literally thousands have been injured and have suffered because of the miner's con, or from silicosis, you know. And as I mentioned earlier, I really believe the EPA and the state, they really totally failed Butte, Montana, okay?